Good evening and welcome to Solidarity on Tap. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. On behalf of everyone at ISN, as well as our national Solidarity on Tap sponsors, Maryknoll Lay Missioners, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, thanks for joining us tonight. For over 15 years, the Ignatian Solidarity Network has been uniting the Ignatian family, meaning the Jesuit network, as well as all of those who are inspired to work for justice through the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to build a more just world through transformational programs and resources that deepen faith and lead to dismantling systematic injustice, collaborative initiatives that bridge divides and overcome exclusion, and collective action to defend and promote the inherent dignity of all God's creation, both people and planet. If you haven't already, please make sure to check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net, and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. Now, many of you know this, but for those who are joining us for the first time, let me give you the background on Solidarity on Tap. It didn't used to be like this. Seriously. In the pre-COVID world, Solidarity on Tap usually took place in cities across the country, bringing together members of the Ignatian family and local bars and pubs to put the social and social justice. Powerful speakers addressed crowds of people from across the Ignatian network and that local community. And it was a really good time. We had a lot of fun. But like many things, we moved virtual in late March, and it's been a lot of fun too. And so we thought we'd keep going. And now we gather every month for a virtual gathering like this. And even though we're gathered virtually, the goal of Solidarity on Tap is the same: to invite people to enjoy fellowship, maybe with a drink in hand, and to hear powerful reflections from members of the network engaged in work for justice. And as always, in order to build and enjoy community tonight, I encourage you to utilize the comments section on Facebook or YouTube, or post to Twitter or Instagram with the hashtag ISNLive to let us know you and your institution are represented with us here this evening. You can also post your comments and questions for our guest speaker this evening on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube as well. So we want to hear from you, and it looks like folks are already engaged in doing that. So welcome to everyone. I want to mention that as we gather tonight as an Ignatian family, we continue to pray for all people affected by COVID-19, for those who've been lost, for their families, for those who are sick, and for those who care for those who are sick. We also want to keep in our prayers those who have been victims of racism and racial inequity in our society, and for those who are working to overcome it. We also need to remember those who've been impacted by recent natural disasters, from forest fires to hurricanes and more. And we pray for our nation, that we seek the common good and that we vote with solidarity in mind when we head to the ballot box in a few weeks. Now, our hope is that this and all Solidarity on Tap conversations can lead us toward a hope-filled future. So with this in mind, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, Father James Martin. Father Jim is a Jesuit priest. He's an author and editor-at-large at America, the National Catholic magazine. His most recent book is titled Building a Bridge: How the Catholic Church and the LGBT Community Can Enter into a Relationship of Respect, Compassion, and Sensitivity. He's a frequent commentator in the media about issues of religion and spirituality, and is known for his appearances on the Colbert Report and his robust social media presence. He studied philosophy at Loyola University Chicago and theology at Weston Jesuit School of Theology, now known as the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, and worked in an outreach program with street gang members in the Chicago housing projects, and also worked with Jesuit refugee service in Nairobi, Kenya, where he helped East African refugees to start a small business and co-founded a refugee handicraft shop called the Makono Center. Besides his editorial, publishing, and media work, Father Martin has been invited by Catholic dioceses and archdioceses to address gatherings of clergy and laity, has spoken at colleges and universities across the country, and leads seminars and directs retreats. On Sundays, he assists at the Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola in New York City. And we're really excited to welcome. So welcome, Father Jim. We're glad to have you tonight. Thanks for being with us.
Chris. Glad to be with you. I want to thank you for inviting me. I really want to thank, as I always try to do, thank the Ignatian Solidarity Network for all the incredible work they do for all of us, but especially for Jesuits and Jesuit apostolates, really helping to bring social justice into so many venues. I'm happy to hear the participation of JVC and JVC Northwest. I mean, goes without saying, I'm a big fan of JVC and JVC Northwest. But I'm also a big fan of the Maryknoll lay missioners. Chris, you mentioned I was in East Africa for 2 years with the Jesuit Refugee Service, and I knew a lot of the lay missioners over there, and they were so impressive. And so it's just great to be with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Yeah, that's great, and I really appreciate your comment about the work that ISN does in collaboration with the Jesuits as a lay organization, working in partnership with the Jesuits, and we talk about it as co-laboring, and so really grateful to co-labor with you tonight in this conversation and things like that. I wanted to start just by asking you how you're doing navigating this global pandemic reality. How has it been for you? You've been probably doing most of your speaking on venues like this and not on college campuses or at parishes. What's this been like for you over the past few months?
Well, I've been okay. I mean, fortunately, no one in my family and no one in my Jesuit community. I'm here in the America House Jesuit community on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So none of us have gotten sick. A lot of my Jesuit brothers have died, though, in different infirmaries. And initially, you can't see it out the window now, but I live right across an alley from Mount Sinai Hospital. And during the height of the pandemic in, say, March and April, I would look out my window and see, I could see the hospital rooms where people were suffering. And outside of Mount Sinai, there were refrigerated trucks where they would keep the bodies. So it was really, it was very intense in New York City. But in terms of America Magazine and my work, most of what we do is in front of a computer and online. And so I finished a book on prayer that's coming out in February called Learning to Pray. I'm working on another book on Lazarus. And as you say, I'm doing a lot of talks and Zoom talks from my desk. So in terms of the work, it's been going okay. I think, like everybody, though, I feel that kind of sadness and heaviness. And I am praying for a vaccine like anybody else.
Yeah. It's all relative, right? So some of the things that many of us have struggled with are pretty minimal in the scope of what many people in our world are facing. So it's good to know that you're safe and continuing to be able to do your work and things like that. Now, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about. Often we hear about, when you're on TV or you're on Facebook or something like this, you're talking about contemporary issues. But I was curious to know, how did you get to where you are? What formed your, particularly in the context of our gathering tonight, Solidarity on Tap, what formed your sense of social justice and social justice rooted in faith?
Well, that's a fairly easy and straightforward question for me to answer, which is my Jesuit training. I grew up in a very good family outside of Philadelphia. Go Phillies, go Eagles, go Sixers, go Flyers. We were Catholic, but not super religious. I didn't go to any Catholic schools growing up. I went to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. I graduated in 1982 with a degree in business and finance. And then I worked for GE in New York City and in Connecticut for 6 years. And, the vocation story is is a different topic. But when I entered the Jesuits, I really had zero experience with working with the poor or for the poor. And I think if you had asked me what social justice was, I probably, and this is not false humility, I probably would not have been able to answer the question. I don't think I'd ever heard those terms. In Jesuit formation, starting from the first week, I think, of the novitiate, we were asked to begin to work with those who were kind of on the margins and struggling. I worked at a hospital for the seriously ill called Uville Hospital, which I think is still there in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My novitiate was in Boston. And, so much of Jesuit training was about identifying with the poor and being poor. We take about poverty. And as St. Ignatius says in the exercises, the spiritual exercises, being with Christ poor, right? Being with Christ as he is manifest in the person who's poor. So I worked, I mean, my gosh, I worked in at this hospital. Then I worked with Mother Teresa's sisters at a hospice for the sick and dying in Kingston, Jamaica. I worked at a homeless shelter in Boston. I worked at one of the nativity schools, the first nativity school in New York City. And then during my philosophy studies, I worked with street gang members in Chicago and at a homeless shelter. And then, as I said, I worked for 2 years in East Africa, which I think really was the place that I started to kind of understand, what it meant to really live, kind of up against it, as Sister Helen Prejean likes to say. I think that was where I started to understand the idea of being with people who are really struggling and really on the margins. And then since then, I've tried to, in my own way, to stand up for people who might be voiceless, refugees and migrants, certainly from my time in Kenya, the poor, and now more recently LGBTQ people who I feel really need a voice in the church, especially. But it was my Jesuit training, and then of course reflecting on the Gospels and seeing where Jesus asks us to go. But mainly Jesuit formation is what did it for me.
Yeah. I want to get to your to some of your work with LGBT Catholics, but before I do that, we have a ton of people who have joined us tonight who have shared that they're out there. So we're going to try to say hello to some of them right now. We'll maybe get some of them a little bit, but welcome to Catherine, who's with us in Suffern, New York, and
Hi, Catherine.
Mary Kay is in Columbia, Maryland. Mary Jo is in Cleveland. Valerie's in Seattle. Deb is in outside of Philly. Philly. Tim is in Omaha. Welcome to John at Detroit Mercy. Jean in Kansas City. Clark is in Charlotte. So many folks here.
All over the place.
He's joining from Bradenton, Florida. Oh, here we go.
Wow.
Ian from joining us from the Philippines. Let's see. Simone says greetings from Washington, D.C. Kathy's in Raleigh. Welcome, Kathy. Hello to Carolyn in San Jose. Sarah's in Philly. She's go for that. Yeah. Mary Jo's in New York City. Welcome, Mary Jo. Probably close by. Maureen's in Cleveland, Ohio. Another Philly friend.
It's a sister Pat Mensing, right?
There we go. And Tom's in Charleston, South Carolina, and there are many more. So we'll get back to those in a little bit.
That's amazing.
I know it's great, and it's what I love is that we always have cities all across the United States, but usually a few folks from beyond the borders of the U.S. or maybe the contiguous U.S. So it's always nice to welcome folks from afar. Now, Jim, as a writer and a public speaker, you've been significantly committed to highlighting the need for the church to be present to LGBT Catholics. Can you talk a little bit more about? You kind of said that this was part of kind of a progression of walking with or kind of standing with different groups of people, but how did it evolve?
Sort of the work of the Spirit. I like most people, including yourself, I know LGBTQ people. I'm friends with LGBTQ people. I minister to them, spiritual direction, know them as parishioners in New York City. And I wrote a few things about them in the magazine, in American Magazine, where I work. But it wasn't until 2016, during when the Pulse nightclub massacre happened, when 49 people were killed, and what was at that point the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. It has unfortunately been surpassed. That I started to get really interested in it. What happened for me was that I noticed that relatively few bishops said anything in response to this huge tragedy, and the few that did, some of them didn't even mention the word gay or lesbian or LGBT. And I just thought, boy, these people, even in death, they are invisible to the church, right? And it just honestly, it angered me. And I did a Facebook post that got a lot of hits. I think it got like 2 million hits, basically saying what I just said and how the church needs to reach out to them. And then New Ways Ministry, a group that ministers to and advocates for LGBTQ Catholics, invited me to give a talk called the Building Bridges Talk. I gave this talk. It was published by America Online. That turned into a book. And then the book started this ministry, which, by the way, I do with, many, many, many other people. And it was really something, because the book initially, had this great kind of grateful response from people. I got standing ovations in churches, and people were hugging and standing in line for hours. But then there was this pushback, which I'm sure people are aware of, a lot of personal attacks online, and it's really, kind of surprising. And then the pushback to the pushback. I got invited to different places, like Cardinal Supich in Chicago invited me to give a talk, Archbishop Gregory in DC. I was invited to the Vatican's World Meeting of Families. And then last year, a year ago in September, I was invited to a private audience with Pope Francis, where we talked about LGBT stuff. So that was the ultimate pushback to the pushback. And so since then, it's been really interesting. It's been a real interesting ministry. And I can also say that there's a documentary coming out in a couple of months about this ministry. It's called Building a Bridge. So that's kind of the next step. But it's the work of the Spirit, because I didn't really set out to do this. And I often say to people, if I had to pick a ministry, this would be the last one, not because of any antipathy towards LGBT people, but because it's so controversial. I'm kind of averse to controversy, but the Holy Spirit out of their ideas, as she usually does.
Sure. You mentioned the shooting in Orlando, and just that it was a time where you felt like the church, could have or should have been more present, kind of been publicly present to what was happening. And you've talked about that in your writing and your social media posts in a lot of different situations that have happened related to situations around racism, around the needs of the poor, of immigrants and refugees. How do you walk that line of trying to be very honest and truthful about maybe where the church is struggling with, while also lifting up all the good that is within the church?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it is a tension, because you don't want to be just a critic, right? And just constantly critiquing the church, because the church, obviously, it's kind of an understatement, does a lot of good. And, I think one of the insights that has helped me comes from Jim Keenan, or James Keenan, as he's known. He was my professor of moral theology in theology. He's now at Boston College. And he said that for Jesus, and in the Gospels, when Jesus critiqued people, he wasn't critiquing people who were kind of trying, like weak and trying, right, where you're always trying. He was, like in today's Gospel, where it's woe to you Pharisees, he's critiquing people who are strong but not bothering, which I loved. And so, as Jim Keenan says, sin for Jesus in the Gospels is more often than not a failure to bother to love. And at the Pulse nightclub massacre, the church kind of just didn't bother, basically. And I think it's important to, in as charitable a way as possible, to encourage the church, to look at people, for example, Black men and Black women, who are afraid to kind of walk down their streets at night, LGBT people, the poor, the sick, people who are suffering from COVID. I mean, the whole sort of range of life issues that we talk about in the church. It's important to focus people's attention on that. I think at the same time, as you say, you can raise up stories where the church is doing great work. It is a balance. It is a balance, because you don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, right? Always just saying all the good stuff as if there's nothing wrong. And you also don't want to be, I would say, Debbie Downer, but you don't want to be someone who's only critiquing the church, because that's not real. Neither of those two things are real. The church, in a sense, is both, like Jesus, is both human and divine, right? And so the human part has some problems that need to be faced. But I don't think there's ever need to be ad hominem or uncharitable or mean, right? Which is, I think, a word we need to reintroduce to our theological lexicon these days. Others think you have to be mean online and attack people, but I think that just gives the church a bad look and a bad name.
Yeah, and you've been so committed to really engaging with people online. I think oftentimes institutions, not just a church, they're going to want to have a one-directional communications mindset, right? Where information goes out from them, but they don't react to anything that comes back, right? And you've been very intentional to engage with people in dialogue. To there's limits to that, and there's a point where it becomes unproductive or hurtful, even, right? I think there's it's a really interesting way of approaching these challenging issues to be open to dialogue with folks, because I think that's really needed in our society. Do you find that to be that? I know that sometimes you respond or call attention to things that are mean or are kind of attacks. But do you find it life-giving to engage in dialogue with folks in social media?
It depends what the dialogue is. I mean, okay, so they're just out and out personal attacks, ad hominem attacks. You're a heretic, you're an apostate, you're a false priest, you're a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, that is not helpful to engage in, because that just brings you to a dark place. And a lot of these people, they're not listening, right? And so it's like Jesus, you shake the dust off your feet. I don't wish them ill or call them names or anything, but they're not listening. Then there's some people that ask legitimate questions or have good critiques that I think it's important to answer. And then some people just have questions, that they're curious about. But I've gotten to the point where I can recognize pretty quickly where this is coming from. Not because I'm not like Jesus. I don't have second sight or foreknowledge. Like he knew what they were thinking in his heart. I mean, I don't know what they're thinking, but sometimes it's pretty clear. Sure. I always find a tip off, don't laugh, is when people call me Padre. Well, Padre, what do you think about this? It's like, that's usually that's not going anywhere good. But what I try to do, I also have some rules for myself, which have been really helpful for me, and it's like kind of hard won. First is never ad hominem. Like if Chris and I are friends. If Chris Kerr put something online, I would never say Chris Kerr is a whatever bad Catholic, or he's not. He's a great Catholic. But I would say, gee, Chris, I'm not sure about this article he wrote because I disagree with it in this way. So no ad hominem. Mm-hmm. No ad hominem. Always try to be charitable. Always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. Try to lift them up. But also, I think it's important to respond sometimes. And then, the other thing is sometimes you just know that the conversation is going nowhere. And it can be, to use an Ignatian term, it can be desolating. And so I try to avoid, I certainly, I used to do this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I do not get into endless Twitter debates. It's just because the way I look at it is this, in terms of Facebook. Look, I'm putting stuff out there on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. If you have a reasonable question, I'm happy to answer it if I can, because I monitor. I have one person who looks at my messages on Facebook, but for the most part, I'm doing all my social media stuff. Right. I don't have a lot of time. But if you want to get into some endless argument about it, I find them time consuming, and I also find that a lot of times they're not listening, and it's all about, it becomes very Pharisaical. Sure. It's all about kind of gotcha. Right. So, but for the most part, I think social media is a good thing for the church, but it can be, I think it has made a lot of division, because there's a lot of stuff out there on me that's just false. And I can't, and I run into it at talks, and people protest, and they get this stuff from crazy websites. And it does make me sad, because there's very little I can do to convince people that I'm not saying this or I haven't done this, because they've read it. And so I'll give you an example, perfect example. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was this priest out in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Father James Altman, who did a post on or a YouTube video that many people saw on why a Catholic couldn't vote Democrat, and you're going to hell if you vote Democrat, which is false. The church never endorses Republican or Democrat or Trump or Biden. You vote your conscience, right? So it was a false statement. I tweeted something responding to that. Nothing about Father Altman, but I just said this is inaccurate, and this is what the church teaches. Later on, he and several other news sites said that I had whipped up my followers to have them call his bishop, which was just false. couple people Facebook messaged me and said, what do I do if I have a complaint? And I said, you can write as bishop, but I in no way went on social media and said that and, had this campaign. Now that's everywhere. And here's the thing, there's very little I can do about that at this point. People think that it's written in articles, he said it. And part of it is you have to just let that go. I mean, I'm not going to chase down every internet rumor. I'd be. Sure. The other thing is, Chris, it is desolating. Mm-hmm. To sort of get into that world can be desolating. So you have to maintain a healthy distance, and I think that's Ignatian. We call it Ignatian indifference.
Right.
I don't need everybody to like me on the web, and they certainly don't.
Well, I want to talk about another topic that people probably have different opinions on. I want to talk about the election and some of the ways that the church is engaged in the election. You kind of referenced some of it, but before we do that, let's say hi to some more folks. We have Aaron is joining us from Indonesia. Welcome, Aaron. Val's joining us from Charlotte. Welcome to Val. Welcome to Sean from Wisconsin. Teresa is in Nashville, and she's a Boston College alum and an FJV. Welcome to Teresa.
Go Eagles.
Bridget's in Virginia. Let's see. Danny's in Burlington, Vermont. Natalie Terry is joining us. Natalie's a good friend of ISN. Welcome to Natalie. Thanks for being with us. Felipe, who's joining from Loyola Chicago.
Go Ramblers.
That's right. And let's see, Sharon in Port Townsend, Washington. So folks from all over. Jeannie's joining us from Huntington, West Virginia. Says hi, Chris. Jeannie's actually my wife's aunt. So thanks for joining me, Aunt Jeannie and Uncle Steve. So all right, and hopefully we'll get to some more folks as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the election. You accepted an invitation to offer a prayer during this year's Democratic National Convention. And can you tell us about what you prayed for? I know there's a caveat in terms of if you had been invited to the Republican National Convention, I know you kind of shared what you would have prayed for there as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I would have used the same prayer. It was a hard decision because I was invited, and initially I thought, no, that's too political. I don't want to be so political. But then I thought, I would go to the Republican one too. If they asked me to pray, and I would pray the exact same prayer, and it was a prayer for the dignity of all human life. So the unborn, the migrant and refugee, the LGBT person, the Black person, the person who's sick with COVID. It was originally a much longer prayer, actually. People asked me why I left people out, and I said, because I only had 40 seconds. But I wanted to bring to that venue, this prayer of basically what we call the seamless garment, or the consistent ethic of life, or whole life, or one life, that all lives are sacred. And I think we can say that, that a lot of the Democrats probably didn't like the fact that I prayed for the unborn, but if I'd gone to the Republican convention, a lot of them wouldn't like the fact that I prayed for migrants and refugees, perhaps. So, I discerned it. I certainly asked for permission, by the way, for all my superiors, because I knew it would be more of a public thing. And I'm still happy that I went. And I think I know that people were surprised that I mentioned the unborn, which always surprises me. But so it was a prayer for life, basically. And I'm, as I said, I look to people. I'm not the first Jesuit to do this. I'm not the first cleric to do this in either party. So I felt like I also had some good predecessors as well.
Yeah. And you've been talking a lot about the election in your writing and on social media. You've talked about the fact that the church doesn't, that neither party's platform is consistent with the platform of the gospel, if you will, right? And Catholic social teaching. And you've talked a lot about the bishop's faithful citizenship document. What do you think it means to be a faithful citizen? What does that mean to you?
That's a great question. I think, sort of simply put, it means knowing the Gospels, right? It means understanding church teaching. It means studying the issues, and then it means using your conscience. That's what it means to be a faithful citizen, right? And the bishop's document is excellent. It's excellent. And the bishops say specifically, we the bishops are not endorsing a single party or a single candidate. And I have to say, Chris, it really does pain me when I see people say you cannot vote for this party or this candidate on both sides. I mean, I've heard people say you cannot vote for Biden and you cannot vote for Trump, right? So both sides are guilty. Although I would say more, this is realistic, more Catholic priests and bishops are saying that you cannot vote for Biden or the Democrat by far. I mean, let's be realistic about this. And that's just false. And I think it confuses people. I think it's disturbing. I think one of my favorite quotes is from Pope Francis, which is, the church is called to form consciences, not replace them. Because otherwise we're robots. And, you know, at the heart of Catholic teaching, which I think has been lost over the last 30 or 40 years, is what's called the primacy of conscience, the informed conscience. So that's a conscience that, again, knows the Gospels and understands church teaching and studies the issues. But the formed conscience is the highest decision maker, right? I mean, so I do lament the fact that so many people are telling people that they cannot vote, and that's just false. But, you know, it has taken hold among some people. So in my little way, I'm trying to remind people of that Catholic teaching as well.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's, but you're right. You know, folks are hearing lots of different things in different parts of the country, and what they're experiencing in their parish life, and then maybe from their local bishop, and then what they're reading in the newspaper could be 3 or 4 different things, right? And so that's challenging.
Yeah, and let me just say, I get a lot of Facebook messages, truly, from people who are so upset about their pastor or their bishop or their parish, mainly their priests, not everyone, obviously. In bulletins and in homilies, they quote it to me, and it's really frustrating to me to hear these things. And I mean, it's like treating Catholics like cattle, right? I mean, you vote this way, or if you don't vote this way, you're going to hell, right? And even the bishops have said, you know, the preeminent issue, of course, is abortion, but even the bishops have talked about that in the context of voting, and these attacks on certain candidates, especially, you know, Biden, who I'm not endorsing, but, you know, to attack him as a bad Catholic. And so it really is, I think, unfortunate. And again, the Pope Francis's line is the best. The church is called to form consciences, not replace them. And I think, Chris, in the past couple of days, I was speaking about this in my Jesuit community tonight. I mean, talking about at dinner, I wasn't giving a talk.
I'm sure they love that.
Well, some people do. It's intensifying. It's really intensifying. And as I think people get closer to the election, and it's just incumbent upon us to remember that, you know, we're temples of the Holy Spirit. You know, I mean, God is dwelling within us, and it's to consult the Spirit within us.
Well, that's a good spot to take a little break. I want to share some upcoming things that are happening with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. But before we do that, we'll just say hello to a few other folks. Katie Russell, who I know is joining us from Cleveland, Ohio, says, nice shirt. Love the shirt, Father. Sarah's joining us from Lexington County, South Carolina.
Hi, Sarah.
Nelson is in Los Angeles, and they're having a watch party with the St. Mark young adult ministry.
Hey guys, the St. Mark.
All those folks out there. Lupe says, well, hello from the Mariano Lay Missioners in New York City. David's joining from Washington, D.C., is from John Carroll University grad, go Blue Streaks, and a Holy Trinity parishioner, which is great. So lots more folks to try to say hi to. But we're going to take a second here and both thank our sponsors and tell folks a little bit of what's going on with the Ignatian Solidarity Network. So Father Jim, you can take a little break, take a little breather here. For months, the ISN team, the Ignatian Solidarity Network team, and our partners across the network have been busy planning the first ever Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice that will happen virtually. And for more than 2 decades, the Teach-In has brought together thousands of faith and justice advocates. And this year, in light of the pandemic, we're committed to making that gathering happen in a virtual space. This year's Teach-In starts next week, and we're excited to invite you to register before noon tomorrow for a discounted rate. You'll join nearly 6,000 people across the country and beyond who've already registered. If you visit ignatiansolidarity.net/IFTJ tonight or tomorrow morning and use the code SOT/sale, So that's SOT flash sale. You can claim your discount to register for the teach-in. We'd love to have you be part of the teach-in. It's a really powerful gathering in person, and I think it'll be a really powerful gathering in its own unique way virtually. So we hope you can join us. This year we'll welcome an exciting lineup of speakers, including Father James Martin, who we've been talking with this evening, plus Bishop Mark Seitz, Olga Segura, Mauricio Lopez, Father Greg Boyle, Sister Simone Campbell, Reverend Michael Ray Matthews. And again, visit ignatiansolidarity.net/IFTJ for all the details, and then use the code SOT flash sale to purchase your ticket with an exclusive Solidarity on Tap viewer discount. So we hope you can join us. Secondly, I want to tell you about something coming right on the heels of the teach-in this year. Election Day is just 20 days away, and we're committed to mobilizing the Ignatian family to exercise the right and responsibility to vote for candidates and issues that support the common good and concern for the most vulnerable people in our society. You can join ISN's Voting is an Act of Love campaign and commit to vote and to mobilize your community. You can get involved in that campaign at the link on the screen, igsol.net/vote, VOTE. So we hope you can join that. And we also urge you to to share the word, tell the world about the campaign from your yard or from your face mask. But that has the message "Voting is an Act of Love" on it. We have some great yard signs and face masks that you can purchase. So you can visit the ISN store at igsol.net/store and use the code VOTE2020 at checkout for a 20% off discount on those great items. I also wanted to invite you to join us in kind of a journey. During the summer, we launched a 21-day Ignatian Racial Equity Challenge, inviting members of our network to learn, pray, and act for racial justice. You can subscribe to that challenge at igsol.net/21challenge. That's igsol.net/21challenge. The link on your screen, and each day you'll receive an email with some ways to learn, some ways to pray, and some ways to connect and even take action around the issue of racial justice. So we hope you'll join us in that journey. You would join over 5,000 people who've already participated in that. And now let me tell you about our sponsors tonight. First, Mary Noel Lay Missioners, who work intentionally with those at the margins for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. To learn more about their work, join their Meet a Missioner Monday live streams on their Facebook page every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So make sure to check that out. Secondly, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, JVC, is a full-time volunteer program that works for social justice while exploring spirituality and faith through a framework of Catholic Ignatian values for individuals between the ages of 21 and 35. You can learn more at jesuitvolunteers.org. And also their partner, JVC Northwest, which is focused on the core values of community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection. Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest is a national direct AmeriCorps program serving in 24 locales across Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And you have to be 21 or over to be eligible for JVC Northwest. And you can find out more at jvcnorthwest.org. We also want to invite you to join us for our upcoming Solidarity on Taps, including Sister Peggy O'Neill, who'll be our guest in November. Sister Peggy has been living and working in El Salvador for over 30 years, and will share her reflections on that work, on the legacy of the martyrs of El Salvador, including Archbishop Romero, and on the current state of El Salvador today. So we hope you can join us next month. Sister Peggy's she's a hoot. It'll be worth it. And you can learn more about Solidarity on Tap at igsol.net/SOT. Now, if you like the conversation this evening and want to share it or watch it again, this broadcast and all previous Solidarity on Tap broadcasts are available at ignatiansolidarity.net or on our YouTube and Facebook pages. So make sure to check those out. and it'll be there right after we finish our talk tonight, so don't worry. Also, if you enjoy Solidarity on Tap, please consider giving a gift to sustain the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network at Ignatian Solidarity /donate. And as we're getting ready to finish up, I'm going to invite Father Jim to come back towards his desk. If I think he may have wandered away. But I want to also remind folks you can share a picture of yourself watching or having a Zoom virtual watch party to your Instagram account and tag Ignatian Solidarity at Ignatian Solidarity and use that hashtag ISN Live. We want to feature you in our next Instagram story, so please make sure to do that. And now we're gonna go back to Father Jim and get a chance to talk a little bit more. But we'll say hello to a few more people. I know we've got let's see, we've got Catherine says hi from Katie and Jimmy in Westchester. Julie says hello from Pasadena. Brian says hello from Bellarmine College Prep in San Jose. Excellent. Jean says hello from Bridgeport, not too far from New York City. That's nice. And there's so many folks. I don't even know how we can.
This is such a great feature.
Oh, here we go. Alex is joining us from Windsor, Canada. So up in our excellent. Alex works at University of Detroit Mercy's Law School, and is a great friend of ISN. Susan says hi from Boston and is an STM grad. And Karen says from our Marino watch party, Melissa Altman says greetings from El Salvador. So the Marino lay missioners are working together tonight or watching together. So, which is great. Let's go back to some questions, and maybe we'll be able to get a question in from our audience too.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask you a little bit about Pope Francis's encyclical that came out earlier this month, Fratelli Tutti, that begins with a reflection on the parable of the Good Samaritan. Father Jim, what can you tell us about the encyclical? I mean, it was lengthy, I think 150, 160 pages, but in particular, what can you tell us about the intent beyond the intent of having the parable of the Good Samaritan kind of frame the entire document?
It's a beautiful encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, and I think, well, it's going to sound strange. I think it works better in parts. You can't just, Tom Rees, my former boss and who works for RNS now, Thomas Rees, the Jesuit, said it doesn't pay to just read it straight through like a book. And I would start with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And all I can say, Chris, I don't want to ruin it for people, but it's a masterful take on the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I was saying to a Jesuit in my community, whenever I hear Pope Francis preach on the Gospels, and I know he's learned and he was a Jesuit for a while and then Archbishop, but I always learn something new. But that parable kind of centers the encyclical, which I think the best way to look at the encyclical is this. Laudato Si, his encyclical on the environment, his social encyclical on the environment and the economy, said everything is connected. Fratelli Tutti, which means all brothers and sisters, is everyone is connected. And so it's essentially, as I would see it, about the common good, right? And it's basically looking at how we respond to one another, how we respond to the needs of the common good, with this idea of what he calls fraternity. You could also say sorority, but friendship. And the people who pass by the Good Samaritan are kind of this is what we often do. As Jim Keenan said, to circle it back to Jim Keenan, they don't bother, right? One of the things that I love in that parable that he talks about is that I just think this is great. And frankly, I'd never thought of it this way before, which is the sign of a good preacher. He said that what the Good Samaritan does is, we all remember the parable where the man's beaten by the side of the road, and the person from Samaria, which was a kind of a place that people, there were tensions between the Jews and Samaritans at the time. The guy who's seen as the bad guy comes to the rescue. And Pope Francis said that one of the things the Good Samaritan gives the man who is beaten is his time, which I thought was beautiful. And that's something that everyone can give someone time. So it's not just the activity that one does, which is important, which is binding up the man's wound and putting oil on him take him to the inn and really going the extra mile, but he gives him his time. And so I think the encyclical is just, filled with really great insights like that. And I think truly, I had to do this myself. I read through it quickly when I got it. We had an advanced copy. I probably shouldn't have said that, but then I had to take my time on the weekend. It came out. I think it was on a Sunday, and I just used it as kind of prayer. And it's beautiful. It's really he really can he can really write encyclicals.
Sure. Yeah. One of my favorite lines in the part about the Good Samaritan was the story of the Good Samaritan is constantly being repeated. And I think as someone who taught the pastoral circle as a part of kind of theological formation, this idea that we're constantly living through that parable in our daily life, right?
Yeah. And I'm sorry, did I interrupt you or?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing. There's some lines that just jump out at you. And for example, American Media had a couple little memes that they put on Instagram. But I think the line that just kind of shocked me, because I'd never heard it in a papal document so bluntly. And this is a right. Now, an encyclical, remember, an encyclical, as you know, is one of the highest levels of church teaching. Also, I mean, I should say that that the death penalty really was, the abolition of the death penalty was really ratified in this document. Pope Francis changed the catechism in 2018, I believe. But in this document, which is an encyclical, again, this high level of church teaching, he said that the death penalty for the Catholic Church is inadmissible, and that the Catholic Church works for its abolition. So this is a kind of, and that's a change, it's a development in doctrine, we can say, a deepening of the doctrine. But in the past, it was permitted. And then the door closed a little bit with John Paul and Benedict, and then it was said, well, you can only have the death penalty if you're trying to protect people, and then that was closed, and then the catechism was changed, and now the door is finally closed on the death penalty. So that was a kind of a newsy thing. But the line that jumped out at me was, people have a right to be different. I just thought, we're going to be unpacking that for a long time. The right to be different.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that. I want to kind of jump backwards for a second. Last month we marked the 19th anniversary of 9/11, and you were in New York City on 9/11, and you ministered to people impacted by that tragedy. Kind of looking back on it, what have you learned from that experience during those days about yourself, about society?
Well, the longer answer is a book I did called Searching for God at Ground Zero. The short answer is, one of the things I learned, it's a long story, but I basically was able to get down there on September 13th, so 2 days after the attacks downtown. And I was let out of this police car right in front of, now for people who aren't, people are in their 20s, they won't remember, but the buildings were still smoking and flaming, and it was pretty horrible. It's like a vision of hell. And I got out, and the policeman said, "Good luck, Father." And I just remember thinking, I don't want to work in a morgue. I don't think I could do that. And at the time, there was a sense of there would be all these survivors, but there weren't. So it was a lot of bringing out bodies and whatnot into the morgue. And I remember thinking, well, I can't work there, but I know what I can do. I can minister to the firefighters and the rescue workers. That I can do, right? So that's what I did. And it was a sense of, knowing who you were, knowing your limitations, right? And I didn't have to do everything. I didn't have to be the priest that works in the morgue and do the hardest thing. So that was very freeing. I learned that in Jesuit formation. What you're good at, what you're able to do. You can't do everything. But it was a real experience, strangely, maybe not so strangely, of the Holy Spirit, because I was at a place where people had then gathered, firefighters, rescue workers, EMT people, all sorts of government workers and nurses and doctors. People came from all over this is ancient history for some people. People came from all over the country to help. And so I was in this place of great selflessness. And so my experience of Ground Zero on September 13th was the Holy Spirit. And I'll tell you one story. I celebrated Mass with some of my Jesuit brothers, and there was no place to announce we're going to have mass. We just set up this table in the midst of, literally in the midst of all this ash and rubble, and started to say mass, and we were giving out the body of Christ at communion. And there were these signs all over the ground zero, big plywood signs spray painted orange with directions. So like I remember one said eye wash station this way, food this way, right? So if you can imagine a sign spray painted with a big arrow, and someone spray painted a sign and put it right next to the altar when we were celebrating mass. And one of the Jesuits I was with said, look at the sign afterwards, and it said body of Christ, the big arrow. And I remember thinking, I mean, on a simple level, it's the body of Christ, meaning the Eucharist is being distributed here. But it's also the body of Christ. We're all the body of Christ. And also the body of Christ that was kind of broken. I had this image of Jesus being broken there. So it's pretty profound. And that, that was a sign, literally and figuratively to me of just the presence of the Spirit there. So my experience, again, it's a strange thing to say that my experience of ground zero per se at, this place of death and this grave basically was one of the Spirit. So it was more of an Easter Sunday moment for me on that day than it was a Good Friday moment, 2 days before.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's important to always reflect on that time, because I think we still have a lot to learn as a country and a society.
Well, we do, and looking back, and I'm sure you remember, Chris. How old would you have been back then?
I was in my second year teaching.
Okay, so you were an adult. I'm sure you remember all people said nothing's going to be the same now. Everything's going to change, and we're all going to be united. And that lasted for about 6 months. Right.
Yeah.
Get that.
Still have a lot to learn. Yeah,
we do.
I want to get a question.
6 months we were united.
Yes, for a period of time. In many ways, we were.
Yeah.
I want to get a question from that was shared from Heidi. Heidi said she's joining with St. Mark's Watch Party in Los Angeles. Says, thanks for your work and for being lovingly critical in the church. That's a nice way of putting it. What advice do you have for the young church that are struggling to be received or belong with their prophetic voices?
Oh, what a great question. Thanks, Heidi, and hello to the St. Mark's Watch Party out there. Yeah, I would say trust that God has put you in this place and that you have something to give and to share. I sometimes think that young people think, well, I have to be like whoever, like Sister Peggy O'Neill or Mother Teresa or St. John Paul or whoever's your hero. But you really have to be you. You have to be you. You don't have to be your idea of what you should be, but trust that God has put you there, and you have a lot of experience, and to really trust that, and also, and as I was saying before, to try to be charitable in all that you do, to never do ad hominem attacks, to always try to raise people up and listen, right? Give people, one thing I forgot to say is give people the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes on some issues, I often say this to LGBT young people, you may know more about this issue than older people do. I mean, when I talk to a lot of young people about LGBTQ issues, they've grown up with this issue and they know people in their families and in their classrooms who are LGBT. So you actually may know a little bit more than the adults. But I would say most of all, trust that God has put you there, right? And trust your voice, and also be rooted in your baptismal call as Christians. You're just as much a part of the church as Chris or me or your local bishop or Pope Francis.
That's right. That's right. I have one last question, but before I ask it, I want to make sure we talked about you mentioned you're working on this book, Learning to Pray, a Guide for Everyone. Can you, there it is, Learning to Pray, a Guide for Everyone, James Martin, S.J. Can you tell us a little bit about what we might find in that book?
I will. Thank you so much for showing that cover. That's so
of course.
Great. Learning to Pray, a Guide for Everyone. I've been working on it for about 5 or 6 years, and it is an introduction to prayer, and it is for everyone. And it is a how-to. And one of the things I talk about that I think is not really discussed in most books on prayer is what happens when you pray. What happens when you close your eyes? So many books of prayer talk, well, when you feel close to God or when God speaks to you or God communicates. And most people say, what are you talking about? So I look at what happens in prayer as insights, emotions, memories, desires, feelings, words, phrases, all the things that happen in prayer. So I talk about different ways of praying, what happens in prayer, and then towards the end of the book, talk about challenges in prayer, dryness, and as well as talking about spiritual direction, retreats. And so it's really, I've really tried to pour everything I know and try to be kind of the spiritual director for the reader and to answer as many questions as I can about prayer in that one book. And feel free to pre-order it. It's on sale now, and it's coming out in February. And I'm really happy about the cover and just how it looks, and it's pretty much done, and I'm really excited about it.
That sounds great, and it sounds like it's something that, you know, very intentionally is set up to be accessible to lots of different folks, right? Which I think
it's written for the person I was when I entered the novitiate, who knew nothing about prayer. And truly, Chris, people would say things like, "Well, I felt God was so close." I was like, "What does that mean? Like, what are you talking about?" So I want to kind of cut through some of the bad mystery that surrounds prayer.
Yeah, that's great. All right, I have one last question for you, and it's a question we ask a lot of our guests on Solidarity on Tap. Just, you know, in a world filled with a lot of desolation and challenges, what gives you hope in your days?
That's an easy question to answer. What gives me hope is the resurrection. And we are people of hope, and that can sound like a platitude, but what I mean by that is this. You know, on Good Friday, the disciples thought that nothing good could happen, that everything was done, everything was over, their leader was killed, they were being pursued by the Romans as far as they knew, they were locked behind closed doors, they couldn't see anything changing. God had other things in store. God had Easter Sunday in store for them. And so the message of nothing is impossible with God brackets Jesus's life, if you think about it. It's what the angel Gabriel says to Mary at the Annunciation: nothing is impossible with God. And it is essentially the message of the resurrection that Jesus brings to the disciples. So we have to live in that resurrection hope. And, you know, the risen one is with us. You know, he's alive, and he's with us through the Spirit. So we have to live that resurrection hope.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and thanks to everyone who's joined us as well. We have a great crowd, and we didn't get to welcome everyone, and so I apologize for that. But know that we know you're here with us, and grateful for your presence all over the world. And again, Father Jim, we really enjoyed this conversation. We enjoy our partnership with you. We're excited to welcome you to the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice this week. So to everyone, thanks for being with us for Solidarity on Tap. We hope you can join us next month as we welcome Sister Peggy O'Neill, and have a great night.
Thanks, guys.